My name is Mabel Williams, and at 67 years old, I never imagined my only son Thomas would break my heart. After losing my husband and raising our boy alone, I poured everything into his happiness. I spent $300,000 on their dream home and $75,000 on a wedding that never happened. The day before the ceremony, my future daughter-in-law, Catherine, looked me in the eyes and said those unforgivable words. Before I tell you what happened next and what I left in that empty house, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when family betrays you. I became a widow at 45 when my husband John suffered a massive heart attack while mowing our lawn on a sweltering July afternoon. One minute we were planning our 20th anniversary trip to Hawaii, and the next I was planning his funeral. Thomas was only 15 then, a sophomore in high school with his whole life ahead of him. That day I made a promise over John's grave that our son would have every opportunity we had dreamed of for him. The next 7 years were a blur of exhaustion. I took double shifts at Boston Memorial Hospital where I worked as a registered nurse. The overtime pay meant Thomas could attend college without drowning in student loans like so many of his friends. While other nurses my age were cutting back hours and planning for retirement, I was picking up extra weekend rotations and night shifts. My hands grew calloused from the constant washing and glove changes, my feet permanently swollen from 12-hour shifts on the hospital's hard floors. Thomas never disappointed me. He graduated summa cum laude from his undergraduate program and went on to law school at Boston University. I still remember the pride that swelled in my chest at his graduation ceremony, knowing John would have been beaming with the same emotion. When Thomas called me 5 years ago to tell me he had met someone special at his law firm, my heart sang with joy. Catherine Morgan was another attorney specializing in corporate law, while Thomas worked in family law. From the pictures he sent, she was stunning, with long auburn hair and the kind of polished appearance that comes from a privileged upbringing. I was thrilled that my son had found love, and immediately began planning how to welcome her into our small family. Our first meeting was at an upscale restaurant downtown. I wore my best dress and even splurged on a professional haircut for the occasion. Catherine was as beautiful as her photos, but I noticed how her eyes swept critically over my outfit and costume jewelry. Still, I chalked it up to nerves and focused on getting to know her. "Your home sounds so quaint," she commented after I mentioned my 3-bedroom colonial where Thomas had grown up. The way she emphasized quaint made it sound like a synonym for outdated or small, but I smiled and nodded. As their relationship progressed, Thomas began mentioning their dreams of buying a home together after the wedding. Property in Boston had skyrocketed, and on 2 junior associate salaries, they were struggling to find something in their desired neighborhood. "Mom, we found the perfect place, but we're about $300,000 short for the down payment," Thomas told me during one of our weekly Sunday brunches. Catherine sat beside him, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. Without hesitation, I offered my help. The money from John's life insurance and my retirement savings had been earmarked for my golden years, but what better use than helping my only child build his future? I wanted Thomas to have the stability and comfort John and I had always planned to provide. "We'll pay you back every penny, Mom, I promise," Thomas said, his eyes brimming with gratitude. Catherine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is so generous, Mabel. We'll make sure your name is on the deed until we've repaid you." The house they chose was a stunning Victorian in Brookline, with 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a garden that reminded me of something from a magazine. It needed work, but I could see why they had fallen in love with it. The asking price was $1.2 million, a sum that made my head spin, but real estate was a solid investment, and this would be their forever home. We signed the paperwork with a verbal agreement that I would be co-owner until they repaid my portion. I didn't push for formal legal documents because, well, this was my son. Thomas was a lawyer himself, and I trusted him implicitly. With the house secured, talk turned to wedding plans. Thomas had proposed at Christmas, presenting Catherine with a diamond ring that must have cost 3 months of his salary. They set a date for June, giving us 8 months to plan. "I want to pay for the wedding," I told them both over dinner at their new home, which was still being renovated. It's traditional for the bride's family, I know, but I've been saving for Thomas's wedding since he was born. Catherine's parents were divorced, and according to her, not in a financial position to contribute significantly. They lived in different states and seemed more peripheral to the planning than I expected. That's so sweet, Mabel, Catherine said, but there was something calculated in her expression. We were thinking of about 150 guests. Is that within your budget? I assured her it was. I had set aside $75,000 for the occasion. It was more than I had initially planned, but with no other children to provide for, I wanted Thomas's wedding to be everything he had ever wanted. We began planning in earnest. Catherine had very specific ideas about the venue, flowers, menu, and music. I accompanied them to tastings and appointments, offering suggestions when asked, but mostly just enjoying being part of the process. Thomas was grateful for everything, constantly thanking me and checking that I was comfortable with the mounting expenses. Catherine, on the other hand, seemed to take my generosity as a given, sometimes changing plans we had agreed upon, without consulting me, always with the excuse that she had found something even more perfect. The first real family dinner with Catherine's parents was an illuminating experience. Her father, Frank, flew in from Chicago, and her mother, Linda, came from Florida. They seemed pleasant enough, but there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite place. During that dinner, I noticed how Catherine subtly took control of the conversation whenever wedding details came up. Mabel had suggested peonies for the centerpieces, she would say with a laugh, but we all know lilies are so much more elegant. Thomas would squeeze my hand under the table apologetically, but he never contradicted her. That night marked the beginning of a pattern I should have recognized sooner, as the systematic erosion of my role in their lives. The first major wedding planning meeting was scheduled at a bridal boutique downtown. I had arranged to take the day off work and was looking forward to helping Catherine select her dress. I arrived at the boutique 15 minutes early, eager and admittedly a bit emotional, at the thought of seeing my future daughter-in-law try on wedding gowns. After waiting 45 minutes past our appointment time, I called Thomas. "Oh, Mom," he sounded genuinely surprised. "Catherine said she texted you. We had to reschedule for yesterday because the boutique had a cancellation. She already found her dress." My stomach sank as I stood there in the empty boutique, the enthusiastic consultant now looking at me with pity. There had been no text message. This wasn't a miscommunication, it was a deliberate exclusion. Our weekly mother-son lunch, as a tradition we had maintained, even through Thomas's busiest law school years, began to disappear from his calendar. "Catherine and I have plans" became his standard excuse, or "Work is just crazy right now, Mom." When I did manage to see him, Catherine was invariably at his side, her arm linked through his possessively. Our conversations were superficial, focusing on wedding details that Catherine had already decided upon without my input. The guest list became another point of contention. I had submitted the names of 10 close friends, fellow nurses, who had supported me through John's death and Thomas's childhood. These women were like family to us. "We've had to trim the guest list," Catherine informed me over coffee one afternoon. "Thomas wasn't present. He was working late again. Your friends from the hospital didn't make the cut. We need the space for some of the partners from the firm." I swallowed my hurt. These women have known Thomas since he was in diapers. They sent him birthday cards every year and attended his graduations. Catherine's smile was practiced and cold. "I understand, but this wedding is about our future, not your past. The firm partners can help advance our careers." The venue I had initially helped them select, a beautiful historic hotel in downtown Boston, where John and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary, was suddenly deemed too traditional by Catherine. Without consulting me, she booked a trendy industrial space converted from an old warehouse. It cost nearly twice as much, and the difference came out of my wedding fund. "It photographs better for Instagram," she explained, when I expressed surprise at the change. No one wants wedding photos that look like they were taken in the 1990s. The mother of the groom dress became another battlefield. I had found a lovely silver blue gown that complemented my gray hair and wasn't too flashy. "That color will clash with our color scheme," Catherine said when I showed her a photo. "And it's a bit attention-seeking, don't you think?" Perhaps something more subdued would be appropriate. I returned the dress and purchased a more conservative beige gown that Catherine approved of, with a dismissive nod. It made me look washed out and 20 years older, but by then I was learning to pick my battles. One afternoon, I arrived early to a meeting with the florist and overheard Catherine speaking to her bridesmaids in the shop's back room. Thomas's mother is just so provincial, she was saying with a laugh. You should see the hideous brooch she wants to wear. It's like something from a thrift store. The brooch in question had been my grandmother's, a family heirloom I had planned to wear as my something old. I slipped out of the shop before they saw me sat in my car and cried for 20 minutes before composing myself enough to return at our scheduled time. Every attempt I made to speak privately with Thomas was intercepted by Catherine. She would appear suddenly when I called him, claiming to be working from home that day. She would answer his phone with a cheerful Thomas's phone, Catherine speaking. Even my text messages received responses that clearly came from her using phrases Thomas never would. A small family gathering at their new home, now fully renovated with my financial contribution, became another painful reminder of my diminishing place in their lives. The seating arrangement placed me at the far end of the table, away from Thomas and Catherine, who sat together at the head. Catherine's college roommate occupied the seat that would traditionally belong to the mother of the groom. Even Catherine's parents seemed uncomfortable with their daughter's behavior. Her father, Frank, pulled me aside during that dinner. Mabel, I want you to know that Linda and I appreciate everything you've done for the kids, he said quietly. This house is magnificent, and we know you're funding the wedding too. They're family, I replied simply. That's what family does. Frank looked troubled. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself too. Before he could say more, Catherine appeared, whisking her father away to show him some feature of the house renovation. My friend Barbara, who had known me since nursing school, was blunt during our coffee date that week. That girl is pushing you out, Mabel, she said firmly. I've seen it before with my sister's son. Once the wedding happens, you'll be lucky if you see Thomas on Christmas. It's not that bad, I protested weakly, but in my heart I knew she was right. Has she asked you to give a speech at the rehearsal dinner? Barbara asked. I realized with a start that no one had mentioned a speech. The rehearsal dinner was traditionally a time for parents to share stories and offer wisdom to the couple. I had already begun drafting what I wanted to say, collecting anecdotes from Thomas's childhood that illustrated his kind heart and determined spirit. When I brought it up with Thomas, he looked uncomfortable. Actually, Mom, Catherine thinks formal speeches are outdated. We're just going to keep it casual. Yet a week later, I discovered that Catherine's father was indeed giving a speech, as was her maid of honor and Thomas's best friend from law school. The final blow came when I received my official wedding invitation in the mail. Despite contributing $75,000 to the event, my name was nowhere to be found on the invitation. Traditional wording would have included, together with Mabel Williams, mother of the groom, alongside the names of Catherine's parents. Instead, it simply read, together with their families. When I called Thomas to ask about the omission, Catherine answered. We decided to go with more modern wording, she explained smoothly. No one does that traditional listing of parents anymore. I later discovered that other invitations did include her parents' names. Only mine had been erased. The evening before the wedding arrived with a flurry of activity. The rehearsal dinner had been a tense affair, with Catherine's father giving a heartfelt speech, while I sat silently at my assigned table far from the main party. Several guests had asked why I wasn't speaking, and I had no good answer to give them. After the dinner, we all headed to the venue for a final walkthrough. The industrial space had been transformed with thousands of dollars worth of flowers, lighting, and decorations. I had to admit, it looked magical, though nothing like the warm, traditional wedding I had envisioned for my son. As the wedding coordinator reviewed last-minute details with the wedding party, Catherine approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mabel, could we speak privately for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you before tomorrow. She led me to the bridal suite, a converted office space with exposed brick walls and velvet furniture that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Catherine closed the door behind us and turned to face me, her expression suddenly cold and calculated. I want to thank you for everything you've done for the wedding. She began, her tone formal, as if speaking to a vendor rather than family. The financial contribution has been helpful. Of course, I replied, confused by her businesslike demeanor. I wanted to give Thomas the wedding he deserves. Catherine's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her champagne flute. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. Tomorrow is about Thomas and me beginning our life together as a couple, as a new family. I nodded, still not understanding where this was heading. To be perfectly honest, she continued, her voice dropping to a confidential tone, your presence has been somewhat overwhelming throughout this process. Your ideas are so outdated, and frankly, your appearance and background don't really fit with the image we're trying to create. My breath caught in my throat. Excuse me. I'm just being straightforward, Catherine said with a shrug. Thomas is too kind to say anything, but it's been embarrassing introducing you to our colleagues. The way you dress, the way you speak about your nursing career as if it's something prestigious. Tears sprang to my eyes as each word landed like a physical blow. I don't understand. Thomas has never been embarrassed by me before. People change, Mabel. Thomas is moving up in the world and certain associations become liabilities. Her smile was sympathetic, but her eyes remained cold. Which brings me to what I really wanted to say. I think the greatest gift you could give us for our wedding would be to step back and allow us to shine without your interference. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Step back. What does that mean exactly? It means, Catherine said slowly, as if explaining to a child that the best gift for our wedding would be if you disappeared from our family. Not literally, of course, she added with a laugh, but maintaining a distance. Perhaps limiting visits to major holidays, if that. The room seemed to tilt around me. Are you asking me to stay away from my own son? I'm asking you to consider what's best for Thomas's future. Our future children don't need to be confused by your outdated values. And speaking of the house, she continued, smoothly changing subjects. Thomas and I have discussed it, and we don't think it's necessary to repay your contribution. Consider it your investment in your son's happiness. My mind reeled, trying to process the calculated cruelty of her words. Does Thomas know you're saying these things to me? Catherine waved her hand dismissively. Thomas understands that sometimes difficult conversations are necessary. He agrees that boundaries need to be established. He's just too soft-hearted to do it himself. I need to speak with my son, I said, standing on shaky legs. He's busy with the groomsmen right now, Catherine replied. And really, why upset him before the wedding? Think about it, Mabel. If you truly love your son, you'll want what's best for him. And what's best is for you to play a much smaller role in his life going forward. With that, she opened the door, effectively dismissing me. I should get back to the wedding party. I'm sure you can see yourself out. I stumbled from the bridal suite, tears blurring my vision. The elegant venue now seemed cold and hostile, every beautiful detail a reminder of how I had financed my own exclusion. I searched desperately for Thomas, finally locating him in a side room with his groomsmen drinking scotch and laughing. Thomas I called from the doorway, my voice breaking. I need to speak with you, privately. He looked up, his smile fading as he took in my tearful face. Mom, what's wrong? Catherine just told me that I should disappear from your lives after the wedding, that it would be her preferred wedding gift. The groomsmen exchanged uncomfortable glances as Thomas set down his glass and came to my side. Instead of the outrage I expected, he looked merely annoyed. Mom, you're overreacting. Catherine just wants our day to be perfect. She probably didn't phrase things well, but I'm sure she meant we need some space to start our married life. She said, your future children don't need my outdated values. She said I'm an embarrassment to you. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, Catherine has certain standards for our social circle. It's important for our careers. I'm sure she didn't mean to hurt your feelings. In that moment, I realized that the son I had raised, the boy who once cried when neighborhood kids made fun of a stray cat, had become a stranger to me. He was choosing to believe Catherine's version of reality rather than the truth standing right in front of him. She also said, you've decided not to repay the money for the house, I added quietly. Is that true as well? A flash of guilt crossed his face. We can discuss financial matters later, Mom. This isn't the time or place. Without another word, I turned and walked away. The drive home was a blur through my tears, the rain that had started to fall matching my emotional state perfectly. The windshield wipers kept rhythm with the thoughts pounding in my head. I had lost him. My only son. My only family. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling as memories of Thomas's childhood played like a movie in my mind. His first steps across our living room floor. The science project I had helped him with until 3 in the morning. The way he had held my hand at his father's funeral, trying to be strong even as tears streamed down his young face. How had that sweet boy turned into a man who would allow his mother to be treated with such disrespect? How had I failed so completely in raising him to recognize cruelty when it was right in front of him? As dawn broke, I came to a painful realization. Thomas saw me exactly as Catherine did, a simple, unsophisticated woman whose only value had been financial. My presence in their lives was now an inconvenience, a reminder of a background they were trying to leave behind. Catherine's words echoed in my mind. The greatest gift would be if you disappeared from our family. Perhaps it was time to take her at her word. As morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, a strange calm settled over me. I had cried all the tears I had to give. Now I felt only a cold resolve hardening in my chest. I went to my closet and pulled down the old photo albums stored on the top shelf. Cross-legged on my bedroom floor, I flipped through pages of Thomas's childhood, tracing the journey from infancy to manhood. Here he was on his first bicycle there, graduating high school, each image a milestone in a life I had dedicated mine to nurturing. The last photo in the album was of John, taken just weeks before his death. His kind eyes seemed to look directly at me across the years, and I could almost hear his voice speaking the words he often told me. "Mabel, never let anyone make you feel small. You're worth more than that." I closed the album with a decisive snap. Catherine wanted me to disappear from their family. Very well. I would grant her wish, but on my terms, not hers. First, I needed to understand my legal position. I retrieved the house paperwork from my filing cabinet. As I suspected, my name was indeed on the deed as co-owner with Thomas. Catherine's name wasn't on the documents at all, as they weren't married yet. I called my old friend Samuel, who had practiced real estate law before retirement. After explaining the situation, I asked the critical question, as co-owner, do I have the right to sell the house? Absolutely, Samuel replied without hesitation. As a joint owner with right of survivorship, you have equal rights to the property. You can force a sale if necessary, though it usually requires court involvement if the other owner objects. What if I find a buyer immediately, and Thomas agrees to the sale? Then it's simply a matter of paperwork. But Mabel, Samuel's voice softened. Are you sure about this? This is a dramatic step. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I told him. They made it very clear where I stand. With legal confirmation in hand, I formulated my 3-part plan. First, I would sell the house immediately. Second, I would cancel all wedding services I had paid for. Third, I would leave behind a message that neither Thomas nor Catherine would ever forget. My first call was to Jackson Reynolds, a real estate agent who had helped me sell John's and my first apartment years ago. I explained that I needed to sell a property immediately, even if it meant taking somewhat less than market value. It's unusual to move this quickly, Jackson warned when he arrived at my home an hour later. But the market in Brookline is hot, especially for historic Victorians. I actually have a client who lost out on a similar property last month. They're still looking and have cash ready. By noon, Jackson had arranged for his clients to view the property that afternoon. Thomas and Catherine would be busy with last-minute wedding preparations at the venue all day, giving me a clear window of opportunity. Next, I called each wedding vendor, starting with the venue itself. This is Mabel Williams, mother of the groom for the Hayes Morgan wedding tomorrow, I explained to the venue coordinator. I need to inform you that the wedding is canceled, and since I am the one who paid the deposit and final payment, I'll need to initiate the cancellation process. There was shocked silence on the other end. Mrs. Williams, canceling the day before, incurs the full fee. There are no refunds at this point. I understand. I replied calmly. Please consider any paid amounts as cancellation fees. I simply want to officially notify you that the event will not be taking place. I repeated this process with every vendor, the caterer, florist, photographer, band, and cake baker. Some were sympathetic, others confused or concerned, but all confirmed the cancellation once I verified I was the paying client. As I made these calls, I was also packing essential belongings. I had already secured a month-to-month lease on a small apartment in Providence, Rhode Island, just far enough away to make casual drop-ins impossible. The moving company was scheduled to arrive at 4 that afternoon for my personal items. The most difficult decision was what to leave behind in the empty house. What message could possibly convey the depth of my hurt while also serving as a wake-up call to my son? I found my answer while sorting through old keepsakes. A framed family photo taken on Thomas's 10th birthday captured a moment of perfect happiness. John and I stood behind Thomas, our hands on his shoulders, all three of us beaming at the camera with identical smiles. I wrote a note on heavy cardstock and slipped it into the frame behind the photo. The words were few but powerful, explaining exactly what Catherine had said to me and how Thomas had failed to defend me. I detailed every financial contribution I had made and included copies of the wedding receipts showing the $75,000 I had spent. You asked for my disappearance as a wedding gift, I concluded. I've granted your wish. The house has been sold to pay back what I contributed since you made it clear you never intended to honor that commitment. The wedding has been canceled. Perhaps now you'll understand the true cost of the family you so eagerly discarded. I added Thomas's childhood memory box, a collection of report cards, artwork, and small mementos I had saved over the years. These items weren't just for sentimentality, they were physical proof of a lifetime of love and sacrifice that had been carelessly devalued. Finally, I included the diamond earrings that had been John's last gift to me before his death. I had been saving them as a wedding present for Thomas to give Catherine a way of including John's memory in their special day. Now they would serve as a reminder of all that had been thrown away. By 3 o'clock, Jackson called with incredible news. Mabel, my clients have viewed the property and want to make an all-cash offer. They're willing to close immediately with an expedited process, since they don't need mortgage approval. The offer was slightly below market value, but more than enough to recoup my initial investment plus a modest profit. I accepted without hesitation and signed the preliminary paperwork Jackson brought over. The full closing can happen next week, he explained. But with this signed intent to sell and their non-refundable deposit, the deal is essentially done. I've never seen a sale move this fast in 30 years of real estate. As the moving company loaded the last of my boxes, I transferred the remaining wedding funds back to my personal account. I had earned that money through decades of difficult work nights, spent away from my son to provide for our future. It would now fund my new beginning. Before leaving, I took one final walk through the house that should have been the setting for family holidays and future grandchildren's visits. In each room, I allowed myself to acknowledge the loss of the future I had imagined. In what would have been my grandchildren's nursery, I whispered a goodbye to the babies I might never meet. In the kitchen, where I had imagined teaching Thomas's children my special recipes, I ran my hand along the marble countertop one last time. When I reached the foyer, I placed the framed photo memory box and earrings on the entry table where they couldn't be missed. I adjusted them carefully, ensuring they would be the first things Thomas and Catherine would see when they entered the empty house. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors, I closed the door behind me without looking back. Catherine had asked me to disappear from their family as a wedding gift. I was simply delivering exactly what she had requested, and perhaps the most important lesson my son would ever learn. The morning of what should have been Thomas's wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect June Saturday that would have been ideal for photographs and celebrations. I woke early in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes, yet to be unpacked, and the remnants of the life I was leaving behind. By 7:30, Jackson Reynolds was already at the Victorian House meeting with the cash buyers for a final walkthrough before they signed the preliminary ownership papers. The full legal transfer would take several days, but the intent to sell document I had signed gave them immediate access to begin moving in. "They're absolutely thrilled," Jackson texted me. "They've been searching for a historic Victorian in this neighborhood for over a year. They're calling it their dream home." How ironic that the house Thomas and Catherine had called their dream home would now fulfill that role for another family, one that presumably valued family bonds more deeply than status and appearances. At 8:15, I received a confirmation email from my bank that the buyer's good faith deposit of $50,000 had been received. It was really happening. There was no turning back now. While the real estate process moved forward, I began the systematic cancellation of each wedding service. The caterer was first on my list, a prestigious Boston company known for their elaborate presentations and locally sourced ingredients. "Mrs. Williams, are you absolutely certain?" the catering manager asked when I called. "We've already prepared much of the food for tomorrow. The specialty items were ordered weeks ago." "I understand the inconvenience," I replied firmly. "Please donate any prepared food to a local shelter. As for the costs already incurred, I have no objection to your keeping the full payment." The florist was more sympathetic when I explained the situation. "Wedding drama is more common than you'd think," she confided. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. The arrangements are all ready to go, so perhaps we could redirect them to a nursing home or hospital." I thought of my former colleagues at Boston Memorial and agreed to have the flowers delivered there. At least the thousands of dollars of roses, peonies, and orchids would bring joy to patients who truly needed it. The photographer expressed professional concern about the contract but became more understanding when I explained that I was the one who had signed it and paid the deposit. "I've seen some difficult family situations," he admitted, "but this takes the cake." No pun intended with the wedding and all. The band was already setting up for sound checks when I reached them. The lead singer was startled by my call but quickly recovered. "We'll pack up right away, Mrs. Williams. And don't worry about the fee. We can book another gig for tonight with a little hustle." His kindness brought tears to my eyes, the first I had shed since making my decision. "No, please keep the payment. You blocked the date for us in good faith." Back at the Victorian, the moving company I had hired arrived promptly at 10 o'clock to pack up my personal belongings from the master bedroom I had occasionally used when visiting. There wasn't much to take, just some clothes, books, and toiletries, but I wanted no trace of myself left in that house. As the movers worked, I carefully arranged what I planned to leave behind. The framed family photo took center stage on the entry table, positioned so it would be the first thing visible upon opening the front door. Beside it, I placed Thomas's childhood memory box, filled with evidence of a mother's enduring love, handmade birthday cards he had created for me, his first lost tooth wrapped in tissue paper, the honor roll certificates I had, proudly displayed on our refrigerator for years. The legal documents showing my financial contributions came next. Laid out in a neat row, the initial wire transfer of $300,000 for the down payment receipts, for the $75,000 in wedding expenses and the 2A2 $300,000 preliminary sale agreement I had just signed with Jackson's clients. Finally, I placed the velvet box containing John's diamond earrings in front. I had originally planned to give them to Thomas after the rehearsal dinner, with a note explaining their significance, how his father had saved for months to buy them for our 15th anniversary, how John had whispered that someday they might adorn the ears of our son's bride. Now I left them with a different note. These were meant to connect Catherine to our family's past. Now they can serve as a reminder of what was too easily discarded. By noon, the movers had finished loading my belongings into their truck. The house stood empty, except for the items I had strategically placed in the foyer. The furniture remained as it had been purchased specifically for this home, but every personal touch had been removed, leaving the spaces looking like a model home, beautiful but soulless. I took one final walk through each room, running my hand along the wallpaper. Thomas and I had selected together, pausing in doorways to remember conversations now tinged with a bitter understanding of their transience. In the kitchen, I recalled Catherine complaining about the backsplash I had chosen, insisting it be replaced with something more contemporary. The replacement had cost an additional $8,000 from my rapidly diminishing savings. As I reached the front door, my phone began to vibrate with incoming messages. The wedding was scheduled to begin in 5 hours, and guests would soon be arriving at a venue that was no longer prepared to host them. The cascade of confusion was about to begin. I silenced my phone without checking the messages. There would be time enough for explanations later if I chose to give them. For now, I needed to complete this final act of self-respect. With one last look at the arrangement in the foyer, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The new owners would receive their keys tomorrow, and Thomas would return from what he thought would be his wedding venue to find his world completely transformed. As I drove away from the Victorian house for the last time, I felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. Catherine had asked me to disappear from their family. In granting her wish, I had reclaimed my dignity and self-worth. The house that should have been filled with future family gatherings would stand empty of my presence just as she had requested. But it would also serve as a monument to the consequences of casual cruelty and entitled ingratitude. What I left in that empty house would speak volumes that my presence never could. By the time I arrived at my new apartment in Providence, my phone had become almost unusable from the constant stream of notifications. I placed it on the kitchen counter and watched as message after message appeared on the screen, the device vibrating so continuously it seemed almost alive with indignation. The first frantic call came from the wedding venue coordinator around 1:30 in the afternoon, just as guests would have been expected to begin arriving for the 3 o'clock ceremony. "Mrs. Williams, there seems to be some confusion. The vendors are all saying the wedding has been canceled, but we have guests arriving. The bride and groom are on their way for photos. What exactly is happening?" I let the call go to voicemail, but her message was soon followed by others from the caterer, the florist, and the photographer, all seeking clarification about the contradictory information they were receiving. At 2:15, the first text from a confused guest appeared. "Mabel, we're at the venue, but staff is saying there's no wedding today. Is there a last-minute venue change? Please advise as soon as possible." By 2:30, my voicemail was full, and texts were coming in rapid succession. Guests had arrived to find locked doors and apologetic staff explaining that the event had been canceled by the person who had paid for it, the mother of the groom. Catherine's first voicemail came at 2:45, her carefully cultivated poise shattered by rage and panic. "What have you done?" she screamed into the phone. "We're standing outside the venue with our wedding party and they're saying you canceled everything. This is insane. Call me back immediately." Thomas's messages began more confused than angry. "Mom, what's going on? There's some mix-up with the venue. Call me as soon as you get this." His tone changed quickly as the reality became clear. "Mom, please tell me you didn't do this. Whatever issues you have with Catherine, this isn't the way to handle it." By 3 o'clock, what should have been the moment Thomas and Catherine exchanged vows, social media was exploding with confused and increasingly dramatic posts from wedding guests. Some expressed concern, others outrage, and a surprising number showed understanding once rumors of Catherine's treatment of me began to circulate. "Always knew that girl was trouble," posted Barbara, my nursing friend who had been cut from the guest list. "Mabel is the sweetest person alive. Must have been pushed too far." I maintained my silence, but monitored the situation through these posts and messages. Around 4:30, Thomas sent a text that told me he had discovered the second part of my wedding gift. "We just got home to get changed and regroup. The house is empty. What have you done with our things?" 20 minutes later, after presumably finding my carefully arranged display in the foyer, "You sold our house. How could you do this? This is illegal. We're calling the police." I knew the police would do nothing. The sale was legal, my name was on the deed, and the paperwork was in order. Still, Thomas's threat stung. That he would involve law enforcement against his own mother showed how completely Catherine's influence had changed him. Catherine's voicemail at 5:15 was cold with fury. "You spiteful old woman. You've ruined everything we've worked for. Thomas is devastated. If you think this will bring him back to you, you're delusional. You've lost him forever now." What Catherine failed to understand was that I had already lost him. My actions weren't an attempt to win him back, but to reclaim my own dignity and self-worth. after both had been so casually discarded. As evening fell, the messages became more subdued, but no less revealing. Thomas's best friend from law school, Michael, sent a surprisingly supportive text. Mrs. Williams, I don't know exactly what happened, but I've watched Catherine push you aside for months. Whatever you did today, I suspect it was justified. Thomas will come around eventually. Reports filtered in through mutual connections about the scene at the empty Victorian. Thomas and Catherine had arrived, expecting to change clothes and regroup after the venue disaster, only to find a house stripped of personal belongings and a new family's moving truck parked outside. According to Jackson, who witnessed part of the confrontation, Thomas had stood frozen in the foyer staring at the family photo and documents I had left, while Catherine screamed about lawsuits and criminal charges. Your son picked up the memory box and just held it, Jackson texted me. The woman was going ballistic, but he wasn't even listening to her. He was reading your note over and over. By the next morning, the fallout had spread beyond immediate family and friends. Catherine's carefully curated social media profiles were flooded with comments and questions about the wedding that never happened. Several guests, now aware of how I had been treated publicly, expressed support for my actions. Thomas's messages shifted from anger to pleading, Mom, please just talk to me. I need to understand why you would do this. Everything we've worked for is gone. The we in his message told me he was still viewing the situation through Catherine's lens. He hadn't yet separated her influence from his own values and perceptions. A week passed, with no direct contact from me. I learned through mutual connections that Thomas and Catherine had moved into her small apartment, their relationship strained to breaking point by the sudden loss of the house and wedding. Catherine had apparently expected Thomas to immediately file a lawsuit against me, while Thomas seemed reluctant to take such aggressive action against his mother. 10 days after what should have been their wedding day, I received an email from Thomas that suggested the first cracks in Catherine's facade were beginning to show. Catherine blames me for not securing the house properly in both our names, he wrote. She says if I had been a better lawyer, you couldn't have sold it. She's talking about breaking up because she can't be with someone who can't protect their assets. I don't know who anyone is anymore, including myself. 2 weeks later, Barbara called with news from Boston. Catherine walked out on Thomas yesterday, she reported, packed her things, and left while he was at work. Word is, she's already seeing one of the senior partners from her firm, the one with the vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. My heart ached for my son's pain, even as I recognized the valuable lesson he was learning. Catherine had revealed her true character when faced with adversity, confirming what I had suspected all along. Her interest in Thomas had always been tied to the financial security and social status he could provide. A month after the non-wedding, Thomas's college roommate Ryan reached out to me. Mrs. Williams, Thomas is in bad shape. He's not eating, barely working, and blaming himself for everything. He knows what Catherine said to you now. Her bridesmaid Amanda finally told him the truth about that conversation before the wedding. He's devastated that he didn't believe you. I sent my first direct response since the day I had walked away. Tell him. His mother loves him. Always has, always will. 3 days later, a letter arrived at my new address, handwritten on familiar stationery, Thomas's distinctive handwriting covering both sides of 3 pages. He detailed his journey from shock to anger to understanding, acknowledging how completely he had been manipulated by Catherine, and how blindly he had participated in my mistreatment. I was so caught up in the lifestyle Catherine promised, he wrote. The connections, the prestige, the social climbing. I lost sight of the values you and Dad raised me with. I became someone I don't recognize, someone who would allow his mother to be told she should disappear from his life without consequence. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that I see the truth now. I see what I became, and I'm ashamed. Catherine's family reached out as well, her father Frank sending a brief but sincere apology. We witnessed Catherine's behavior and said nothing. That silence made us complicit. Your response was justified and probably overdue. We're sorry for our part in this. As summer turned to fall, the dust began to settle. Thomas and I exchanged occasional emails, cautious and formal, at first gradually warming as weeks passed. He had thrown himself into pro bono work representing elderly clients who were being taken advantage of by family members, perhaps his way of atoning for his own failings. Catherine, I heard, was already engaged to the senior partner, a man 30 years her senior, with significant financial assets and connections to Boston's elite social circles. She had landed the prize she had always been seeking. I wished her no ill will but was profoundly grateful that she would not be the mother of my grandchildren. The Victorian house that had been the stage for so much drama was now home to a young family with twin toddlers, according to Jackson, who kept me updated on neighborhood news. The husband was a pediatrician, the wife, a children's book author. They had painted the front door yellow and planted a butterfly garden where Catherine had planned a formal rose display. The house had found owners who would fill it with the love and laughter it deserved. 6 months after the day that changed everything, I received a text message from Thomas that suggested he had finally begun to understand the most important lesson of all. I found Dad's old fishing rod in a box of things Barbara saved. For me. Remember how he used to say the measure of a person isn't what they accumulate, but what they give? I never really understood that until now. 6 months into my new life in Providence, the sharp edges of betrayal had begun to soften. My apartment, initially a temporary refuge, had gradually transformed into a true home. I had painted the walls a soft blue that reminded me of the ocean. John and I had loved to visit hung artwork from local artists and filled bookshelves with volumes I had always meant to read, but never found time for. My healing journey had not been a straight path. There were days when grief ambushed me in unexpected moments, like when I found one of Thomas's childhood drawings tucked into an old cookbook, or when I automatically bought his favorite cereal during a grocery trip. Those moments would send me back to my therapist's office, a small, sunlit room where Dr. Martinez helped me process the complicated emotions of family estrangement. Grief for the living is often harder than grief for the dead, she told me during one particularly difficult session. Death has a finality that allows us to begin healing. Estrangement leaves open wounds that can be reopened with every holiday, every birthday, every significant milestone missed. The support group she recommended specifically for parents, estranged from adult children, became a lifeline. Every Wednesday evening, I sat in a circle with 8 other parents, whose stories echoed aspects of my own. There was George, whose son had cut contact after marrying a woman who controlled every aspect of their relationship. There was Judith, whose daughter had been turned against her by an ex-husband. There was William, whose son had developed addiction issues and blamed his parents for every consequence of his choices. In their company, I found understanding without judgment. We celebrated small victories together, like the first night without tears, or the courage to attend a family function where questions about estranged children might arise. We supported each other through difficult anniversaries and shared strategies for building new traditions when old ones became too painful. Volunteer work emerged as another source of healing. Boston Memorial Hospital had been my workplace for decades, but Providence Home for Seniors became my new purpose. 3 days a week, I read to residents with failing eyesight, helped with activity planning, and simply sat with those who had no regular visitors. "You've got a gift for listening, Eleanor," a 93-year-old former English teacher told me after I had spent an afternoon hearing stories of her wartime romance. "Most people just wait for their turn to talk. You actually hear what's being said underneath the words." "I've had practice," I replied, thinking of all the years I had listened to patients' fears beneath their medical questions, to Thomas's adolescent anxieties beneath his casual teenage conversations. New friendships blossomed slowly but steadily. My neighbor Lucia, a widow like myself, invited me to her book club. The local community garden assigned me a plot beside Terrence, a retired firefighter who taught me everything about growing tomatoes in New England's temperamental climate. The coffee shop around the corner became my Saturday morning ritual, where barista Jade eventually stopped asking for my order and simply prepared my latte with an extra shot as soon as I walked through the door. Life was rebuilding itself around me, piece by piece, day by day. The first tentative communication from Thomas came 7 months after the wedding that never was. An email appeared in my inbox one Tuesday morning with the subject line, "I miss you." The body contained just a few sentences. I've been in therapy for 4 months now. I'm beginning to understand what happened and my part in it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I think about you every day. Thomas. I read those words a dozen times, my heart racing with conflicting emotions. Joy that my son was seeking help. Fear of being hurt again if I opened that door. Hope that perhaps something could be salvaged from the wreckage of our relationship. Caution born from hard-won wisdom about maintaining boundaries. After consulting with Dr. Martinez and my support group, I crafted a response that was both honest and protective. I'm glad you're getting help, Thomas. I think about you too. I need more time before we can discuss rebuilding our relationship, but I appreciate you reaching out. Take care of yourself. Love, Mom. His reply came within minutes, I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'm not the same person I was then. Over the next several weeks, our communication remained minimal but consistent. Brief emails about everyday matters. No mention of Catherine, whom I had heard through mutual friends, had indeed married her senior partner in a lavish ceremony in the Berkshires. No pressure for reconciliation, just gentle maintenance of a tenuous connection. 8 months after the non-wedding, Thomas asked if we could meet in person, suggesting a cafe halfway between Providence and Boston neutral territory for both of us. I arrived first, selecting a table by the window where I could watch for his approach. When he appeared in the parking lot, I barely recognized my son. The polished corporate attorney had been replaced by someone thinner, with casual clothes and hair that needed a trim. He looked more like the boy I had raised than the man Catherine had shaped. "Mom," he said simply. When he reached the table, his voice breaking on that single syllable. Thomas the First replied, fighting the maternal instinct to stand and embrace him. We had too much to resolve before physical affection could resume its place in our relationship. We ordered coffee and spoke carefully around the edges of our situation, discussing my volunteer work and his recent career change to a smaller firm focused on elder law. Finally, when the initial awkwardness had subsided somewhat, Thomas placed a small wrapped package on the table between us. "I found this in the memory box you left," he explained. "I think you should have it back." I unwrapped the package to find the silver frame that had once held John's and my wedding photo, the one Thomas had broken accidentally when he was 9 and had painstakingly repaired with superglue and determination. "I remember the day this broke," I said softly. "You were so upset, certain we would be angry." "But you weren't," Thomas replied. "Dad sat with me for 2 hours while I glued every piece back together. He said, sometimes the things we repair end up stronger than they were before." The metaphor hung between us, too obvious to require explanation. "I can't undo what happened," Thomas continued. "I can't take back my silence when Catherine said those things to you. I can't erase the years of allowing her to gradually push you out of my life. But I've spent months examining how I became someone who could hurt the person who sacrificed everything for me." "What did you find?" I asked, genuinely curious about his journey of self-discovery. "That I was terrified of not measuring up," he admitted. "Dad was this larger-than-life figure in my memory, successful and confident. You worked yourself to exhaustion to give me opportunities. I felt this enormous pressure to justify those sacrifices, to be exceptional. Catherine seemed like proof I had made it, that I was good enough. Her family connections, her social status, the way other lawyers at the firm respected her, it all felt like validation." I nodded, understanding dawning. "You were trying to be worthy of what we gave you. But in doing that, I betrayed everything you taught me about what actually matters." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "Catherine left the day after we found out she wasn't getting the house or the wedding she felt entitled to. 8 months together and she was gone within 24 hours when things got difficult. I'm sorry you were hurt," I said, and meant it. No mother wants to see her child in pain, even when that pain comes with necessary lessons. "Don't be," Thomas replied with surprising firmness. "It was the wake-up call I needed. The person I became with her wasn't someone I'm proud of. The way I treated you, my own mother," he trailed off, unable to continue. We established boundaries that day for a careful, gradual rebuilding of our relationship. Weekly phone calls. Monthly in-person meetings on neutral ground. No financial entanglements of any kind. Honesty even when uncomfortable. Regular check-ins about how we were each feeling about the pace of reconciliation. "I won't rush this," Thomas promised as we prepared to leave. "I know trust takes time to rebuild. And I won't hold on to the past as a weapon I promised in return. We move forward, not back." 1 year after the day Catherine had asked me to disappear from their family, Thomas and I celebrated a quiet Thanksgiving together in my Providence apartment. It was nothing like the elaborate family gatherings I had once imagined hosting in the Victorian house, but it held something more valuable: authenticity. As we washed dishes side by side, Thomas asked the question I had been expecting for months. "Do you regret what you did? Selling the house, canceling the wedding?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be completely honest. I regret that it came to that point. I regret not establishing clearer boundaries earlier. I regret not having the difficult conversations when the red flags first appeared. I placed a freshly dried plate in the cabinet before continuing. But the actual actions? No. They were necessary for my self-respect, and ultimately for both of us, to learn valuable lessons about what family truly means. Thomas nodded slowly. "I would have become someone I hated if that wedding had happened. And I would have lost you anyway, just more slowly and painfully." The most profound lessons from that painful chapter became guideposts for the new life I had built. First, self-respect must come before people-pleasing. By allowing Catherine's gradual erosion of my place in Thomas's life without protest, I had taught her that I would accept any treatment. True love sometimes means standing firm rather than constantly giving way. Second, financial generosity should never come at the expense of personal dignity. My desire to help Thomas had blinded me to the importance of clear agreements and boundaries around money, especially within family. Third, actions speak louder than words. Catherine's behavior had revealed her true character long before her explicit request for my disappearance. I had chosen to ignore those signals out of love for my son and desire for family harmony. Fourth, it's never too late to start over. At 67, I had rebuilt my life from scratch, finding new purpose, new connections, and new joy. Age was no barrier to reinvention when necessity demanded it. Finally, forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or erasing consequences. Thomas and I were building a new relationship based on mutual respect and clearer boundaries, but the lessons of the past remained an essential part of our foundation. 2 years after selling the Victorian house, I received an unexpected letter from Catherine's father, Frank. He wrote that he and his ex-wife, Linda, had reconnected at their daughter's wedding and begun dating again, inspired partly by witnessing the consequences of family division through Catherine's behavior. "Your courage in standing up for yourself showed us it's never too late to insist on being treated with dignity," Frank wrote. "Catherine hasn't spoken to either of us since we declined to contribute to her second wedding. We chose self-respect over appeasing her demands, and while the estrangement is painful, it's also freeing." Thomas eventually met and began dating Rachel, a pediatric nurse, with a warm laugh and practical nature. The first time he brought her to Providence for dinner, I watched carefully for signs of the entitlement Catherine had displayed, but saw only genuine interest in getting to know me and respect for the relationship Thomas and I had rebuilt. "He talks about you all the time," Rachel told me while Thomas was taking a phone call. "About how you taught him what real strength looks like, not by words but by actions. That's rare, you know. To learn such a difficult lesson and actually grow from it instead of becoming bitter." The Victorian house that had once represented my dreams for Thomas's future occasionally appeared in my thoughts, but without the sharp pain of earlier days. According to Jackson, who still sent holiday cards each December, the family living there had welcomed a third child and painted the exterior, a cheerful blue with white trim, nothing like the sophisticated gray Catherine had insisted upon. Sometimes when I volunteer at Providence Home and sit with elderly residents who have been abandoned by busy children and grandchildren, I think about Catherine's words, "The greatest gift would be if you disappeared from our family." She had meant it as cruelty, but it had ultimately been prophecy. My disappearance had indeed been a gift, not just to her, but to Thomas and myself as well. It had stripped away pretense and forced uncomfortable truths into the light. It had cleared space for growth and rebuilding on firmer foundations. The empty house I left behind had contained my most powerful message: that love without respect is meaningless, that family bonds require nurturing from all sides, and that even at 67, a woman could choose dignity over doormat status. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Thomas and Rachel are expecting their first child, a daughter they plan to name Johanna after my late husband. They've asked me to help design the nursery in their modest but warm Cambridge apartment. The future stretches before us, uncertain but hopeful, a path we now walk with clearer vision and stronger boundaries. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about family healing and finding strength in unexpected places. And remember, it's never too late to choose self-respect, even when that choice comes with painful consequences. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth in all your relationships.